The air in the makeshift bar tasted of rust and regret. It was a place cobbled together from the bones of ambition. A triple-wide shipping container dropped onto the gravel of forward operating base Dagger. High in a mountain range so remote and inhospitable, it felt less like a part of the world and more like a scar upon it. The walls sweated a cold condensation that mingled with the lingering smells of diesel fuel, stale beer, and the metallic tang of fear that never quite washed out of the inhabitants' clothes. Outside, a wind that had been born in the Siberian wastes howled a constant, mournful dirge, scouring the landscape and rattling the container's corrugated steel skin like a malevolent spirit demanding entry. The only light came from a string of naked, caged bulbs that hummed with a weary, incessant buzz, casting long, dancing shadows that made every corner seem deeper and more menacing than it was. This was not a place of comfort. It was a pressurized way station for souls in transit, a purgatory of grit and waiting. In the furthest corner, away from the boisterous knot of men who had claimed the center of the room as their territory, a figure sat in profound stillness. To a casual observer, she was a study in anonymity, a ghost already half faded into the grim backdrop. She was small, with a wiry frame that seemed almost too delicate to withstand the brutal gravity of the place. Her fatigues were sterile, stripped of all identifying insignia. No name tape, no rank, no unit patch, not even a flag. They were the functional clothes of a contractor or a transient specialist, designed to say nothing at all. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot, and her face, pale under the jaundiced lights, was a mask of placid neutrality. She held a mug of what was likely lukewarm tea, her hands wrapped around it not for warmth, but as a simple point of anchor in the swirling currents of noise and tension. She was not drinking, she was observing, but her gaze was not directed at the men. It was fixed on a small, intricate piece of metal on the table before her, a component of some esoteric device she was meticulously cleaning with a tiny brush and a cloth. Her movements were economical, precise, each wipe and turn a miniature ballet of practiced efficiency. She was a rock in a loud, chaotic stream, and her silence was a presence, a quiet weight in the room that was more substantial than all the noise combined. The noise had a name. Lieutenant Commander Deckard. He was a Navy SEAL, and he made sure everyone within a 100-mile radius knew it. He was a large man, built not of steel but of bravado, his muscles and ego seeming to swell to fill whatever space he occupied. His face, deeply tanned and etched with lines from sun and salt, looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself. But his eyes held the restless, hungry look of a man who measured his own worth by the deference of others. He stood at the center of his pack, a half-dozen other SEALs who orbited him like moons around a gas giant. They were loud, their laughter a percussive series of barks that echoed harshly off the metal walls. Deckard was telling a story, his voice a confident baritone that sliced through the generator hum and the shrieking wind. It was a story about marksmanship, about an impossible shot he'd made in some forgotten dust bowl of a country, and his men hung on every word, their faces a mixture of genuine admiration and the practiced sycophancy of a team that understood its hierarchy. Authority radiated from Deckard like heat from a furnace, but it was a brittle, scorching heat, born of rank and reputation rather than the quiet, unassailable gravity of true command. His story reached its climax, punctuated by a final, booming laugh. As the echoes died down, his gaze swept the room, a conqueror surveying his domain. It snagged on the still figure in the corner. He paused, a smirk playing on his lips. To his eyes, trained. To see the world in terms of threats and non-threats, friend and foe, she registered as nothing. A woman, small and unassuming, in a place defined by masculine aggression. An anomaly, an easy target. He saw a clerk, an analyst, maybe a linguist who had gotten lost on her way to the intelligence tent. He saw someone who did not belong in his world, and his instinct, honed by years of dominating his environment, was to put her in her place. He nudged one of his men. "Look at that," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire container to hear. He gestured with his beer bottle toward the corner. "Thinks she can hang with the big dogs." The other SEALs chuckled, turning their attention to the woman. She did not look up. Her focus remained entirely on the small metal component in her hands, her movements as fluid and uninterrupted as before. This utter lack of reaction seemed to nettle Deckard, a violation of the unspoken rule that when he spoke, the world was supposed to listen. He swaggered toward her table, his team following like a pack of jackals trailing their lion. They formed a loose, intimidating semicircle around her, their large frames blocking out the weak light and casting her into a deeper shadow. He leaned over her table, planting his thick hands on its surface, the metal groaning under his weight. The smell of stale beer and sweat washed over her. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he said, his voice laced with a condescending drawl. She finished one final, precise wipe of the component, set it down gently on the clean cloth, and then, with a slowness that was both deliberate and maddening, she raised her head. Her eyes met his. They were a pale, washed-out gray, the color of a winter sky over a frozen sea. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was nothing at all but a kind of clinical assessment, as if she were examining a piece of faulty equipment. "We were just talking about real soldiering," Deckard continued, emboldened by her silence, mistaking it for weakness. "About sending rounds downrange, the art of the long-distance kill, something you wouldn't know anything about." He grinned at his men. "You're no sniper." The declaration was met with another round of chuckles. It was a statement of the obvious, a joke at the expense of the outsider. It was meant to sting, to humiliate, to establish the natural order of things in this violent, masculine world. The woman's expression did not change. Her unnerving calm was a shield his aggression could not penetrate. It was like shouting at a mountain. The silence stretched, and in that silence, the dynamic began to shift. His confidence, so loud and absolute a moment before, began to feel performative. Her stillness felt authentic. The onlookers, the other soldiers and contractors nursing their drinks, had fallen quiet, their conversations tapering off as they sensed the strange, inverted tension of the scene. They were watching a lioness, allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius, and the jackal was too arrogant to even realize it. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, without inflection, but it cut through the room with the clarity of a bell. "I am where I am supposed to be, Lieutenant Commander." She had used his rank. It was a subtle, precise cut. She was not intimidated. She had identified him, assessed him, and addressed him with the barest minimum of formal protocol, a gesture that was somehow more dismissive than any insult. The use of his full rank stripped the informal dominance from his posture. It placed them, however briefly, within a formal military structure, where his behavior was suddenly and glaringly inappropriate. Deckard's face tightened. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine anger. He was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he had already categorized as insignificant. Her refusal to play the victim, her refusal to be cowed, had turned his display of power into a public failure. He felt his men watching him, waiting to see how he would reassert his dominance. "Is that so?" he snarled, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. He was now fully committed to breaking her. "What are you? Some kind of paper pusher from headquarters? Did you get lost? Because this is the sharp end. We don't have time for tourists here." He punctuated his statement by deliberately knocking her small toolkit off the table. The metal instruments clattered onto the grated floor, a jarring, discordant sound in the now silent room. It was a petty, childish act of aggression, the last resort of a bully whose words have failed him. She did not flinch. She did not turn. Her gaze remained locked on his, her pale eyes as unreadable as ever. She watched him for a long moment, letting his pathetic act of physical escalation hang in the air, exposed and ugly for all to see. Then, with a grace that was almost contemptuous in its fluidity, she bent down from her chair. She did not kneel. She simply folded, her movements economical and sure. One by one, she picked up her tools, a calibrated torque wrench, a set of feeler gauges, a micro-optic collimator, and placed them back in their foam-cut case. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. When she was done, she rose and placed the case back on the table. She looked at Deckard, and for the first time, a flicker of something registered in her eyes. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was a profound, almost pitying disappointment. It was at that precise moment that hell broke loose. The world dissolved into a cacophony of sound. A klaxon alarm blared, a piercing two-tone shriek that vibrated through the metal floor and into the bones of every person in the room. Red lights began to flash, strobing the container in hellish pulses and turning the men's faces into grotesque masks of alarm. Over the intercom, a voice, strained with urgency, crackled to life. "All personnel, condition red. I repeat, condition red. A-team to the TOC, immediately. All section heads, report to the TOC. This is not a drill." The spell was broken. The personal drama in the bar was instantly vaporized by the arrival of a far greater crisis. Deckard and his men reacted on instinct, their bodies tensed for action. The bar emptied in a chaotic surge of boots on metal as soldiers ran toward their duty stations. Deckard gave the woman one last, venomous glare, a promise of unfinished business, before turning and storming out into the howling wind, his team in his wake. She remained seated for a moment longer, a solitary island of calm in the receding tide of panic. She closed the lid of her toolkit, the click of the latches an absurdly small, final sound in the echoing blare of the alarm. Then she stood, picked up her case, and walked toward the door, her pace unhurried, her purpose absolute. She was not running toward the chaos. She was moving to intercept it. The Tactical Operations Center, or TOC, was the nerve center of the FOB, a cramped, windowless shelter packed with glowing screens, humming servers, and the palpable stench of adrenaline. It was a controlled chaos, a symphony of frantic voices trying to impose order on an unfolding disaster. The base commander, a full-bird colonel named Hayes, stood before the central screen, his face a grim mask of concentration. He was a good man, a competent officer, but he was a creature of doctrine and process, and the situation unfolding on the screens before him was something far outside the manual. Deckard and his SEALs burst in, adding their own brand of aggressive energy to the already overloaded room. "What have we got, Colonel?" Deckard demanded, his voice already assuming a level of command that wasn't his to take. Intel just got a positive ID on Omar Al-Jani, Hayes said, his voice tight. The Jackal. He's here, in that compound. Ridgeline 7. He pointed to a grainy thermal image on the main screen. It showed a small, stone structure perched precariously on a mountain crest several kilometers away. He's holding a meeting with regional lieutenants. This is it. This is the whole damn network in one room. A murmur of excitement and dread went through the room. The Jackal was a ghost, a high-value target who had been at the top of the kill list for half a decade. To have him fixed in place was a miracle, but the miracle was wrapped in a nightmare. The problem, a young intelligence officer chimed in, his voice cracking slightly, is his security detail. We're tracking at least 2, possibly 3 elite counter-sniper teams. They're dug in on the surrounding peaks. They're using the terrain. We can't get an asset close. Air support is a no-go. The ceiling is dropping and this blizzard is coming in faster than forecasted. Any bird we send up will be blind and a sitting duck. So we take them out, Deckard said with a dismissive wave of his hand. My guys can make the shot. A weather technician, a sergeant with weary eyes, shook his head. Negative, Commander. The shot is impossible. The storm front is creating extreme atmospheric distortion. We have multiple, unpredictable wind shear layers between here and the target. The barometric pressure is dropping like a stone, and we're getting thermal inversions off the rock faces. Your ballistics computer will be feeding you garbage data. It's not a shot. It's a prayer. Deckard's face darkened. He was a hammer, and he was being told the world was no longer made of nails. My men don't pray, Sergeant. They shoot. He turned back to the colonel. Give us the green light. We'll put a team on the eastern approach. We can get within 2 clicks. 2 clicks? The weather tech scoffed, before catching the colonel's glare and silencing himself. But the damage was done. Everyone in the room knew it. A 2-kilometer shot in these conditions wasn't just improbable, it was a fantasy. They would be firing blind into a hurricane, and the muzzle flash would instantly give away their position to the Jackal's own world-class snipers. It was a suicide mission, and a pointless one at that. The window of opportunity was closing. In less than an hour, the blizzard would be at full strength, and the Jackal would be gone, perhaps forever. The talk was filled with the sounds of loud, ineffective debate, of men whose training and technology had finally met a problem they could not solve. Their confidence was a hollow drum, beaten in defiance of an indifferent storm. It was into this vortex of panicked indecision that she walked. Sergeant Ava Rostova entered the talk as quietly as a shadow. No one noticed her at first. She moved along the periphery, her pale eyes scanning every screen, absorbing every piece of data. She was not reading reports. She was inhaling information, her mind, processing the chaotic streams of telemetry, meteorology, and thermal imagery with an inhuman speed and clarity. The frantic noise of the room seemed to part around her, a bubble of preternatural calm in the heart of the storm. She stopped behind the weather technician. She did not speak. She simply stood there, her presence a silent question. The sergeant, feeling a change in the air behind him, turned. He saw the woman from the bar, her face as impassive as before. He was about to tell her this was a restricted area when she pointed a single, slender finger at a small, almost unnoticeable anomaly on his atmospheric pressure chart. There, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a resonant frequency that seemed to cut through every other sound in the talks. That's your window. A transient pressure wave, a katabatic inversion channel. It will stabilize the air column for approximately 90 seconds. The technician stared at her, then at his screen. He had seen the flicker, but had dismissed it as sensor noise. He ran a diagnostic. His eyes widened in disbelief. She was right. It was a real, predictable phenomenon, a fleeting corridor of stable air that would form in the heart of the raging storm. It was a path. She moved on before he could speak, gliding toward the central command console. She now had the attention of the room. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Deckard, in mid-argument with the colonel, fell silent as he saw her, his face contorted with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "What the hell is she doing in here?" he roared. "Colonel, get her out of here!" Colonel Hayes opened his mouth to issue the order, but Rostova spoke first, her voice still calm, still clinical, but now imbued with an authority that was absolute and undeniable. She was no longer addressing any single person. She was addressing the room. She was addressing the problem. "Patch me into the J-STARS feed. I need real-time synthetic aperture radar. Data overlaid with the current thermal imaging. Slave satellite comms channel 7 to my datapad. Give me direct control of the MQ-9 on station. I need to adjust its orbit to a high-angle retrograde pass to paint the target with its laser designator on a 1.7-second pulse frequency." The room was stunned into silence. It was not just the content of her orders, a cascade of highly technical jargon that left most of the occupants, including Deckard, completely lost. It was the delivery. She was not making requests. She was issuing commands, and the comms technicians and drone operators began to instinctively comply before the colonel could even react. Her words were a foreign language of expertise, a dialect of lethality that silenced all the amateurs. She moved to a vacant console, her fingers flying across the keyboard, bringing up new windows, new data streams, transforming the station into her personal instrument. "Colonel, I need authorization for the XR-300 platform and the M903 SLAP-T ammunition," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Hayes stared at her, dumbfounded. "The XR what? I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have that system." "Yes, you do," she replied, still not looking at him. "It's in a black Pelican case in the back of Armory C, Bay 17. Marked as geological survey equipment. The ammunition is in a separate container, marked high-altitude meteorological sensors. The access code is my serial number." She recited a long string of numbers and letters without pausing. A supply sergeant, on headset with the armory, suddenly spoke up, his voice filled with awe. "Sir, he found it. It's here." Deckard's face was a canvas of crumbling arrogance. He stood frozen, a statue of obsolete authority, watching this anonymous woman single-handedly take command of the entire operation. His world, with its clear hierarchies and brutal simplicity, was being dismantled before his very eyes. This woman, this paper pusher, was operating on a level he couldn't even comprehend. The men in the room, his own team included, were no longer looking at him. Their attention was completely fixed on her. They were witnessing a masterclass, a demonstration of competence so profound and so effortless that it felt like a form of magic. She worked with a terrifying, focused grace. Her hands moved on the controls. Her eyes tracked a dozen shifting variables. Her mind calculated trajectories through a four-dimensional battlespace of time, space, wind, and gravity. She was not a soldier preparing to fire a rifle. She was a physicist solving a complex equation of motion. She was a surgeon preparing to make an incision miles away. The rifle, a sleek, futuristic weapon unlike anything they had ever seen, was brought to her. She assembled it with the deft, familiar movements of a concert violinist picking up her Stradivarius. "The window will open in 3 minutes," she announced to the silent room. "Target is behind 7 inches of reinforced concrete, but there is a ventilation shaft just below the main window. The shot will be a ricochet. I will put the round through the shaft. It will impact the interior floor at a 75-degree angle and deflect upward into the target." A collective gasp went through the teos. A ricochet shot from kilometers away. In a blizzard. It was not just impossible. It was insane. Deckard finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate croak of protest. You can't. No one can make that shot." Rostova finally turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were no longer empty. They were filled with an ancient, cold light, the light of a star in a distant galaxy. "I can," she said. And in that moment, everyone in the room believed her. Just as she was settling the rifle into its cradle, a high-priority communication alert flashed on the main screen. A secure video link was being established. The face that appeared was weathered and severe, etched with the immense responsibility of command. It was General Maddox, the 4-star commander of all special operations in the theater, a living legend whose reputation was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. "Colonel Hayes," Maddox's voice boomed from the speakers, a sound like gravel grinding together. "Report. What the hell is going on at Dagger? My board is lit up like a Christmas tree." Colonel Hayes snapped to attention, his face pale. "General, we have a fleeting opportunity on Omar Al-Jani, sir. We are attempting to—" Hayes's voice trailed off as General Maddox leaned closer to his own camera. His eyes narrowing, he was not looking at the colonel. His gaze had been caught by a secondary camera feed showing the tactical console where Rostova was preparing her shot. A flicker of disbelief, followed by profound recognition, crossed the general's features. His entire demeanor shifted, the harsh, commanding bark softening into something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like relief. "Stand down, Colonel," Maddox said, his voice suddenly quiet but carrying an immense weight. He was now speaking directly to the image of the woman. "Sergeant Rostova, I was not aware you were in theater." He turned his gaze back to the main camera, his eyes sweeping over every shocked face in the TOC. "As of this moment, this entire operation is under her exclusive command. All assets are hers to direct. Dagger is to give her anything she requires. Is that understood?" Then he looked back to her. "Winter Ghost has the board." The name descended into the room like a physical blow. Winter Ghost. It was not a call sign. It was a myth, a legend told in hushed tones in the classified briefing rooms and clandestine training facilities of the world's most elite units. There was no official file for Winter Ghost. There were only stories. Stories of a single operator who could appear and disappear in the most hostile environments on Earth. Stories of impossible assassinations, of shots that defied the laws of physics, of entire enemy command structures decapitated overnight without a single witness. Winter Ghost was the weapon the government used when it needed an act of God, a quiet, invisible scalpel to solve a problem that fleets and armies could not. They said Winter Ghost had taken out a warlord from a moving helicopter in a sandstorm. They said Winter Ghost had eliminated a rogue scientist through the cockpit window of a taxiing airliner. They were fables, ghost stories told to frighten rookie intelligence officers. And she was right here, in their TOC. Deckard felt the blood drain from his face. The floor seemed to drop out from under him. The woman he had mocked, the paper pusher he had tried to humiliate, was a figure of such legendary stature that a four-star general deferred to her without hesitation. His entire sense of self, his carefully constructed identity as the apex predator, shattered into a million pieces. He was not a lion. He was not even a jackal. He was a clueless child who had wandered into the den of a dragon and tried to poke it with a stick. He felt the eyes of his own men on him, and for the first time in his life, he saw not admiration, but pity and contempt. Rostova gave no sign that she had even heard the general. Her world had shrunk to the rifle, the screen, and the numbers that spooled across her datapad. "Window opening in 10 seconds, she said, her voice a flat monotone. The TOC held its breath. The only sound was the hum of the electronics and the distant howl of the wind. She leaned into the rifle's optic. Her body became part of the machine. Her breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle did not roar. It coughed, a strange, suppressed crack that was shockingly quiet. The shell casing ejected in a graceful arc of brass. For several long, agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The thermal image of the target compound remained unchanged. Deckard felt a wild, desperate hope that she had missed. And then, on the screen, a single bright flare erupted inside the building. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The intelligence officer, staring at his own screen which monitored encrypted enemy communications, tore off his headset. His face was white with shock. "Chatter. Enemy comms are in chaos," he stammered. "They're screaming. The jackal is down. I repeat, the jackal is down. Single projectile. Hit from an impossible angle. They're calling it the hand of God." The TOC erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective, stunned exhalation of breath. It was a sound of awe, of disbelief made real. Colonel Hayes stared at Rostova, his mouth agape. General Maddox on the screen simply nodded once, a gesture of profound, ultimate respect. Then his image winked out. Rostova pulled back from the rifle. Her work was done. She began to break the weapon down with the same calm, meticulous precision she had used to clean her tools in the bar. She packed it away, piece by piece, into its case. The storm outside raged on, but the crisis within was over. She had bent the laws of nature to her will and executed a miracle. Later, after the storm of adrenaline and backslapping had subsided, she found Deckard. He was alone, standing outside the tuck, letting the freezing wind whip at his face. He looked smaller, diminished, as if his humiliation had physically compressed him. He did not see her approach. "Lieutenant Commander," she said. He flinched and turned, his face a mess of shame and confusion. He looked like a man preparing to be struck. He started, but the words died in his throat. What could he say? "Sorry?" She held up a hand, silencing him. Her expression was not one of anger or triumph. It was the detached, analytical look of a diagnostician examining a patient. "Your actions in the bar were not a personal insult to me," she began, her voice calm and even. "They were a critical tactical failure, a catastrophic failure of intelligence gathering." She took a step closer. "You made an assessment based on incomplete and biased data. You saw my gender, my size, my lack of insignia, and you created a profile. You concluded I was a non-threat, a soft target. You were wrong. That mistake, in a different context, would not have resulted in your personal embarrassment. It would have resulted in the deaths of you and your entire team." She let the words sink in, each one a perfectly placed shot into the heart of his professional pride. "Your aggression, she continued, was a failure of discipline. You could not control the situation with presence, so you resorted to volume. When volume failed, you resorted to physical intimidation. This is the behavior of a child, not an elite warrior. It demonstrates a profound lack of confidence in your own abilities. A truly confident man does not need to shout. A truly competent operator does not need to prove his worth by diminishing others. She deconstructed him, piece by painful piece, not with malice, but with a cold, irrefutable logic that was more devastating than any punishment. He could only stand and take it, stripped bare in the freezing wind. "I spoke to Colonel Hayes," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "And to General Maddox. There will be no formal reprimand, no entry in your service record." A flicker of relief crossed Deckard's face, but it died as she continued. "Instead, you and your team are being reassigned. Your next deployment will be a specialized training rotation. You will be learning advanced, unconventional warfare techniques, long-range ballistics in extreme environments, infiltration and exfiltration in non-permissive terrain, and most importantly, situational assessment and threat identification." She paused, letting him absorb the final crushing blow. "Your instructor will be me. Class begins at 0500 tomorrow. Be on time." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirling snow, leaving him alone with the ruins of his arrogance and the cold, hard promise of his re-education. The story of that day on Fob Dagger became a modern military fable. It was told and retold, embellished with each telling, until the ricochet shot became a triple ricochet, and the blizzard became a Category 5 hurricane. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained intact. It became a teaching tool at Quantico and Coronado and Fort Bragg. It was the ultimate cautionary tale about the dangers of assumption, a brutal lesson in the difference between substance and style. The legend of Winter Ghost grew, but Ava Rostova herself simply vanished back into the classified shadows from whence she came. Her name never appearing on any official roster, her deeds forever relegated to the secret histories of a hidden war. Years passed. The world turned. Wars ended, and new ones began. On the sun-baked asphalt of the Naval Special Warfare Center in California, a new generation of SEAL candidates, young and brash and filled with the same unearned confidence that he once possessed, stood before their final instructor. He was older now, his hair flecked with gray, his face weathered not just by the sun, but by a hard-won wisdom. His movements were quieter, his voice lower, but when he spoke, the young men listened with a reverence they could not have explained. He no longer radiated the scorching heat of bravado, but the steady, deep warmth of true authority. He was Master Chief Deckard, one of the most respected instructors in the program, and today, he was telling them a story. "I'm going to tell you about the most dangerous person I ever met," he began, his eyes distant, looking back across the years to a cold, metal room in the mountains. This person wasn't big, wasn't loud, didn't wear any fancy insignia, but this person could walk into a storm, look into its heart, and bend it to their will. And in my arrogance, I didn't see the storm. I only saw a small woman in a quiet corner. He told them the whole story. He spared himself no embarrassment, recounting his own foolish words, his petty aggression, his complete and utter humiliation. He told them of her unnerving calm, her cold precision, her impossible command of a crisis that had broken lesser men. He told them of the ricochet shot, of the name Winter Ghost, and of the brutal, year-long re-education he had endured under her tutelage, a period that had broken him down and rebuilt him into the man he was today. When he was finished, a silence fell over the young candidates. Their cocksure smirks were gone, replaced by a new, sober understanding. The most important lesson you will ever learn is this, Master Chief Deckard said, his voice resonating with the power of lived truth. The deadliest threats do not announce themselves. True strength is quiet. True competence does not need to boast. Let your actions be your argument. When you enter a room, assume you are the least capable person there until you have proven otherwise. Observe, listen, learn. Because you never know. You never know if the quiet little paper pusher in the corner is the one who writes the laws of physics. That is the lesson. It is a story born of the military, but its truth is universal. In our lives, in our workplaces, in our communities, we are constantly tempted to judge by appearances, to equate volume with value, to mistake confidence for competence. We build hierarchies based on the superficial, on titles, on uniforms, on the sound and fury of those who demand our attention. But true mastery, true strength, is rarely found in the spotlight. It resides in the quiet corners, in the still depths, in the unassuming individuals who have dedicated their lives to the pursuit of excellence. It is the quiet professional, the hidden master, whose work speaks for itself in a voice far louder and more permanent than any boast. The challenge for all of us is to learn to see past the noise, to recognize that quiet competence, and to afford it the respect it has earned, not through words, but through deeds. For in the end, it is not the shouters who shape the world, but the silent, steady hands that do the work.